Hey everybody, Keith Tanner here from Flyin Miata, and today we're going to be talking about hood vents. What they're for, why you put them on your car, and how they work. You will notice that the camera work is far improved today. Travis has stopped by to run the camera, and so he will be the director of cinematography today, so it's not just me running around anymore, so thank you Travis for coming out. So, hood vents. You see them all over the place. You see them on race cars, you see them on street cars. You know, we've got them for sale. Obviously, other Miata vendors have them all over for sale. You see them poking holes all over the place. What's the point? Well, there's a lot of misconception about this. A lot of people think the entire purpose is to control underhood heat. Because, you know, there's a turbo car, it's been driven recently. If I go in and put my hand on that turbo, it's going to be hot. But honestly, that's not that important. What's important to us is the heat exchangers, the stuff in the nose, the intercooler, the radiator, the AC condenser, the oil cooler, the transmission cooler, all those coolers you've got going, power steering cooler, all that coolers you have down there only work if air is going across them. So the entire purpose of the hood vents is to help pull air across all those heat exchangers and help get rid of all that heat that your car is generating and loading up and trying to transfer to the surrounding air. So the way they work, air always goes from an area of high pressure to low pressure. It's lazy. Life's easier over in the low pressure area, so it will go that direction. So what we're doing is we're taking the high pressure underhood air and then we're venting, putting a hole in the hood, or the thing that's keeping it from getting to the low pressure air, and allowing it to pull through and get to the other side. So these are obviously aftermarket hood vents. You'll see them on a lot of factory cars as well. You'll see them on race cars where they've been beautifully built into the hood. You'll see aftermarket hoods for Miatas that have them built in. But the general concept is almost always the same, and that is simply you're trying to work a pressure differential. So the air comes into the car. Some of it goes into the nose, surprisingly little. You'd be surprised how much restriction there is with all of those various heat exchangers in there. If you've ever played with, say, with a smoke trail and a bunch of fans trying to blow onto a car in a dyno, you'll find that most of the air goes around the nose because you built up a whole bunch of high pressure here, but there's also high pressure in the engine bay behind it. We talked a couple of weeks ago about the hood vent, or the fender vents that can be used to sort of pull some of that air through the fenders, but really the most effective place is right here. So the air coming over the hood, it hits this, it's sort of got a bow wave, and then it goes effectively that direction. And for those of you who remember high school physics, Bernoulli's principle is that the faster air is moving, the lower the pressure. I'm paraphrasing there, but that's effectively what I mean. High-speed air is low pressure air, stagnant air, built-up air is high pressure air. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to put these vents at a spot that is low pressure, because the lower the pressure on the top side of the vent, the more air will pump through it, and the more air will pull into the nose through those heat exchangers and get rid of all that heat. So how do you find the low pressure areas of the hood? Well, you can do it with a whole bunch of CFD if you've got access to a wind tunnel. There's also things you can do, but you can also play with tufts. You can put little tufts of wool or something on there and see what the air is doing. You can see where it's going. But the way that works really, really well for dealing with stuff like hood vents is a magnehelic gauge. That's a magnehelic gauge. This one's been around the block. You can pick these up for $60, $70 on Amazon. I'm sure there are other sources you can find one used. That's awesome. But basically, it's just a cup that's got a high pressure and a low pressure tap on the back, and it shows you the difference in pressure between those two. So I've got this hooked up to the high pressure hose. Yeah, so if I just blow in here, I'm not even blowing in the hose, I'm blowing at it. So this one is calibrated in up to 1 inch of water, which is not a whole lot. We have another one that goes up to, I think, 4. So what this is just a relative pressure gauge. And this will tell us which way the air is going to go. If it's going towards, it's going to go from that low pressure to the high pressure. So how do you work that out on a car without, without drilling a bunch of holes in the hood? Here's the tool that we use. This is a recreation. But this is a stick with a standoff on it, and then the hose going to the magnehelic gauge on the other end. Now I literally put this together in the 15 minutes before we started doing this particular show. But what this does is it allows me to put this at the hood And this could be a little bit lower, but it allows me to put this at a specific point in the hood and then measure the relative pressure right there. If the relative pressure is, say, in the interior, if it's not moving around, you'll get good deltas. You'll be able to tell, is this a high pressure area or a low pressure area as you work your way around the hood. You start off by drawing yourself a grid line of Scotch tape or something, or masking tape on the, masking tape on the hood, so you've got a grid line, and then you have one person drive, hold a steady speed, and the other person just lean over the windshield and go around from point to point and make a note of what the pressure gauge says at each one. It's a really simple experiment to do, but it actually gives you extremely good data. I'll show you. Pull this up. This is a pressure map of an NC that Brandon and I did years ago. The lower the number, the lower the pressure. And the units are not really important. They're just relative units. But what you can see, and I'll show you this on the whole car itself, is that you've got a band of low pressure right here at the nose of the car, so the bow wave of the car, and then you've got low pressure as it falls off the sides, and then very high pressure at the cowl. So this tells us if we wanted to put vents on this hood, we want to put them somewhere, you know, right here would be a good place, over here would be a good place, this would be a very, very bad place. So I'll show you that on the car itself. I will show you that on the car itself. So effectively we have that bow wave almost coming up here, so there's this low pressure area right here, which is great for venting a radiator, but there's reasons why it's not always used on Miata vents, for example. I'll show you that in a moment. Low pressure area here, and then the air accelerates and goes this direction, so you've got sort of a band of low pressure going over this way, and then the other side as well. I haven't actually done pressure testing on ND yet. It'd be interesting to know if this has any effect on that regard, if it moves the pressure zones around. So that's why you often see Miata hood vents sort of a little bit offset of center and about a third of the way from the front of the hood, is because that's a very good low pressure area to put it. It also lines up well with the structure under the hood. We'll pop this up and we'll show you what's going on under here. These hood vents are from Verus. We also sell hood vents from Singular. One of the questions we had is why we don't sell the Singular ones for the ND, and I think honestly the reason for that is because they didn't exist when we started selling the Verus, and we just didn't think about it yet. So we'll look into that for sure. So there we go underneath. This type of hood doesn't have the obvious bracing that the earlier Miata hoods do. But you can see the general way of installing these is you have to cut a hole, and then you drill holes to attach the vents, and then attach the vents. They can either go on the top of the hood or the bottom of the hood. These Verus ones are designed a little differently than the Singular ones. I'll show you some Singulars in a moment. And that they have studs built on them. They're designed to go on top of the hood. See the studs? You can just kind of see where they're welded in the background there. But they have the little studs sticking through, and so they bolt on. Very clean installation. A little bit harder to fabricate. These are not the cheapest option, but they're beautifully made. You can't fault that. I will show you. These are the Singular vents here. These ones, from my talk about the ideal location, you will notice are not in the ideal location. That's because this car has a long history of being experimented upon, and there was already holes in the hood. So sometimes the answer is you put the vent where the hole already is. That's certainly been the answer here. We pop this up, and you can see the structure on the hood on this car. This one has been chopped up because this has been a science experiment for over a decade. It's missing bits and pieces everywhere, but you'll see there's a good place to put a vent normally right here. There's a good place to put one right there, and a good place on that side, and you'll notice that's where the Singular ones for the NA sit. The NB ones are very similar. They follow the bracing under hood, which happily follows the stress, or the low pressure areas pretty nicely. And for those who are asking about hood structure, this particular car has a terrible hood structure because somebody has cut out most of it at one point or another. The parts that are still there aren't even attached, they're actually kind of riveted on. That's a race car. Generally speaking, they don't affect the structure much because a well-designed set of vents in the intended location will retain most of the factory bracing. So this particular car, it has problems, but race car. So why don't you see that front center vent, the one that pulls right up from behind the radiator very often on Miatas? Well, the reason for that is because there's usually a lot of stuff in the way. Travis is not used to using the gimbal. There's just a lot of stuff in the way. In order for that to work really, really well, you'd want to have a vent under the hood as well, pulling directly through the radiator. But there's stuff in here. Now, there's an intake system, there's a battery. Battery can be dealt with. Intake system, kind of important. There's a coolant overflow, overflow tank. So that's why this car, you don't tend to see the big waterfall style that you often see on dedicated race cars that don't have to deal with all this stuff, but they can move it out of the way. They will sacrifice everything else for that maximum cooling. So the second best option is to put these side ones right here, which will pull air out. Now it's important when you do this, if you're pulling air out of this hot, stagnant engine bay, the air is going to come back in somewhere. And the idea is you want it to come back in through your radiator. So it's important to have all your ducting in place on your radiator, all the stuff that people are doing anyway, so that the air, like I said, it's lazy. It'll take the easy way around something. If it's easier to go around the heat exchanger than go through it, it will go around. So you want to block that off so that this thing, everything in here is fully shrouded, so that when we pull air out of the engine bay, it's got to come back in through here and get our heat exchangers working. Now the biggest question, let me just make sure I got this. Yeah. The biggest question that everyone always has is basically waterproofing. What happens in the real world where stuff falls out of the sky? Well, the answer to that is your underhood area is reasonably well waterproofed. You can actually drive a car almost underwater, but you can get through some surprisingly deep water before it gets in trouble, usually with the intake going under. That's a problem. But most of these connectors, most of these attachments that are under here, most of these components are reasonably well waterproofed. There's specifications for it. The manufacturers will all test their stuff at different levels. Aftermarket stuff may or may not be built to the same level, but fundamentally, a little bit of water in your engine bay, not a problem. You can wash your engine bay. We do it on a regular basis. What you've got to watch for is high pressure. If you get a pressure washer and you aim it right at this ECU connector, and these ECU connectors are pretty nicely waterproof. I don't know if I can get one open here. Let's see. You can see that there is a gasket. There's a rubber gasket on here. So these are fairly well waterproof. You don't really have to worry about them getting a little bit of water on them. Hitting with a high pressure hose, that's a problem. But you're not going to get high pressure hose water from one of these things. What you'll get is drips. You get dribbles. Honestly, that's not going to hurt most engines. Years ago, when we started first selling a vented hood back in 2003 or so, I actually parked my car on the lawn with a sprinkler running for 20 minutes, simply to prove that it's not going to cause any problem. The one place you've got to watch out for is usually the spark plug wells. Don't try to pour water directly into this gully because it can get into the spark plug wells, and that can cause some problems depending how well the plugs are sealed. And you'll see that most vents, it's not a good place for vents anyway. We already talked about that. So don't put vents there, and you won't have a problem. Water getting on here, no big deal. So you can buy rain covers. Say for the Verus, they do have a little rain tray that goes in here that catches the water and dribbles it down in the corner where it doesn't matter. They drop down the effectiveness of the vent because it's a restriction. Not really a big issue, unless you're the sort of person that details your engine bay on a regular basis. The concern about rainwater getting in here is not really a big problem. I raced this car in a literal, actual hurricane with intakes here, it had hood vents here, and it was I don't know what category it was, but it was an actual legitimate hurricane, and we had much bigger problems with hydroplaning than we do with any sort of misbehavior because of water coming in. And this is, of course, an aftermarket bonanza of non-standard parts, and it still has no problem with it. One of the common questions is, should you put them over the hood or under the hood? Well, putting them over the hood like this is a little more race car. You've got exposed rivets. Again, these are singular ones being used in the wrong application. You've got these exposed rivets. You've got this exposed edge, which theoretically is a little ugly. So that's the downside to this. The upside to this is you can't see the hole I cut, which was a little ugly. When you put them under the hood, you've got to do a nice trim on the hole, like the Fender Vents you can see on here. if you put them on the inside, you need to have some sort of trim around there, some sort of sealant, and you can of course see the cut itself. So that's what they look like. Pretend that's the hood. That's what they look like when they're mounted on the inside. On the outside, they look like this. Not a big structural difference. One of the other tricks or things you'll often see is a gurney flap. I don't know if gurney flap is really the right term in this particular situation, because that traditionally is the little flip up at the wicker bill at the end of the wing. But this is what people are referring to, this little thing here. And that's basically just a little trick to supercharge the vent. It trips the air, causes a bunch of low pressure right behind it, and helps pull the air out of that vent. So it's a way to make it a little bit more efficient at the expense of, a little bit of aerodynamic ugliness. Is it necessary? I've never done any before after testing. The theory says this should improve the effectiveness of the vent. Will you need it? That's another question. So this car has them on there. They're standard with the Verus parts. I believe they're standard with the singulars as well. I'm not 100% sure on that one, but I didn't put them on the singular one there. Check my questions. Cowl hoods. So a cowl hood is based on the old muscle cars. I used to have a Camaro. That's where this engine came from. Briefly had a Camaro that had a high-rise hood that was literally this tall. World's worst autocross car, because it had a nose that was probably 15 feet long and you couldn't see anything on this side of the car. It was terrible. But it had a great engine, so I kept the engine. But the cowl area, as you've seen, is very high pressure. There's this big pileup of air right here. And if you put a cowl hood on the car and you have any sort of venting there, the air is actually going to go in. It's actually higher pressure here than it is on the hood. So that trick that you see sometimes on, what shall we say, a certain style, where you put risers back here and you lift up the back of the hood, what you're doing there is you're actually pouring air under hood. You're making all of your heat exchangers work less efficiently. It might be a pseudo racer look, but it's certainly not a functional one. Don't put spacers under here. This is a high pressure area. It's a great place for an inlet if you want lots of air for an inlet, like our Randall cowl. It's a bad place for an exit. So don't do you can get cowl hoods. Simpson Design makes a cool looking one, but it's good for clearance for stuff underneath. It's good for an intake if you want to suck in from the backside, but don't think it's going to be a good exit for air, because we've shown with tough testing that tufts actually pull back under the hood in that case. Do we have any questions coming in from the people, Travis?
Oh, wait, just got one.
This just in.
Just in. What cars in what situations might you need hood vents?
That's okay. That's actually probably where I should have started. When do you need hood vents? You need them when you're having trouble with your heat exchangers. When the heat exchangers are not cooling the car enough, for example. This is a way to improve your cooling system. It's a way to improve the airflow through all those heat exchangers, because cooling a car, there's 3 steps. One is you have to get the heat from the engine, basically, into the coolant. And that's mostly the job of the engineers, but that's what reroutes, for example, are designed to do. The second job is to basically get it into the radiator, and that's where you deal with things like water pumps moving at their most optimum, that sort of thing. And the third job is to get it out of the radiator, and that's to get air across the radiator. An efficient design of radiator, that's what fans are for, just to get air moving across there, because the radiator can't get rid of heat if there's not air going across. It's got to go somewhere. Same with intercoolers, same with oil coolers, all those other coolers that we deal with, those heat exchangers. So the entire purpose of this is to pull air across those heat exchangers. So if you are having trouble with cooling, this is a great way to improve your cooling. Also has handling benefits, because this whole hood is a low pressure area, especially along here. And as you might remember, that's how wings work. Wings work by having low pressure on the top, high pressure on the bottom, that pulls the wing up. Not wings on cars, wings on airplanes. We don't want that. We don't want the whole front of this car to be acting like a wing. So what we're doing with these vents also is we're taking the high pressure air underneath, we're dumping it on top, we're raising the pressure on top of the hood, and we're stopping its tendency to lift up by basically equalizing the pressure a little bit more, and we're getting rid of some of that front lift. So you're actually going to increase your front downforce by doing this as well, by allowing that air to run through there and effectively get rid of the wing effect of this enormous hood. It's not a big pounds per square inch difference, but there's a lot of square inches here, so you can have a surprising amount of lift on a hood. There's an Exocet guy that was recently looking at problems. His hood is bulging in the middle. He's going down the straights at the racetrack, and the hood's trying to lift on him. And his first thought was, how many more pins can I put in this thing? When really the correct answer was, how many holes can I put in this thing to get rid of that thing acting like a wing and spoil the lift that's going on? So that's another reason to put it. It's why the Martini car actually has them, in large part, was to give it more front downforce, to balance out the big downforce wing on the back, and also help keep it cool. That car has absolutely no problem staying cool on track, so it's working. But yeah, two reasons. Even naturally aspirated cars, if you're having trouble getting hot on the track, doing this to pull more air through your heat exchangers will be a bonus, or will be this will be very effective. And as a bonus, you will get more front grip. You will get less high-speed lift on the nose by doing this. And that's another reason why you see it on every race car that's allowed to do it. Do we have any more questions there, Travis?
We have a couple of questions.
Okay.
One, just for fun, Mike Cola wants to know, how many PhDs does your lab coat add?
I don't know if I've told the story in this lab coat. We built an Exocet a few years ago with a supercharged 6.2 liter LSA engine in it, 556 horsepower. And the designer of the Exocet says, if you guys make that, I am going to give you, and I apologize, children, plug your ears, I'm going to give you a lab coat that says Professor Batshit. And we built the car, we delivered it to the customer at Road Atlanta, and Warren stood me up there on my birthday in a presentation in front of the Atlanta Miata Club, and gave me this lab coat that says Professor Batshit on it. So there you go. Thank you, Warren. I wear this with pride. It adds 5.2 PhDs, which brings me to a total of 5.2. So there we go.
This was one of the, I think, Instagram questions we had as well. Someone wants to know if there's a difference in heat dissipation with the vents mounted on or under.
Right, yeah, if there's any real difference in on top versus underneath. I'm sure we can come up with a bunch of theory as to how putting them underneath is a little bit more effective. It might be. It's certainly going to cause a little bit less turbulence without this seam up here. In reality, I think the difference is going to be so small that the considerations of installation will overcome that. You know, whether you like the look of having something riveted to the top of your hood, or whether you want something that looks a little more OE poking up from underneath. I don't think the functional difference is liable to be big enough for most people who are retrofitting a Miata. Now, if we were running $1 million CFD program trying to optimize a DTM car, we might come with a different answer there. But for the time being, do what floats your boat. If you like the look of this, go for it. If you like the looks of it underneath, go for that. I'm going to double check my Instagram questions I have them over here.
While you're grabbing those,
While I'm grabbing those,
do the vents change the OEM aerodynamics and possibly increase drag?
I'm going to leave that to someone who has more PhDs than I do. I honestly don't know what it's doing for drag. I'm thinking it's probably helping, because you're moving air from high pressure to low pressure, you're filling in some of the low pressure areas, you're moving air that would be stagnant because you've got a lot of pressure build up right in front of that radiator normally, and you're helping that move through. So I gotta think it's gotta help, but we've not done any testing, because every time that we've done hood vents, it's always been because we want the handling benefits or we want the cooling benefits, or both. And miles per gallon has never really been investigated or been a major focus. I suspect that the difference would be minor, and I suspect that it would be in favor of the hood vents, just based on that lack of, you know, decreasing that very, very high pressure area in the nose. But I haven't tested it yet. I'd love to see if someone does that test. I'd love to know how, and I'd love to see the results. That makes sense on naturally aspirated cars. If they get hot, they do. Yeah, and almost all the questions I have here are talking about ducting and water.
Yeah, we just got another one asking car washes and rainstorms.
Car washes, rainstorms, not a problem. Basically, that's what it comes down to. There's nothing underneath these things that can't get a little bit wet, that doesn't get a little bit wet. I mean, just think about Exocets. Those guys are taking a car that was built back in the 90s and removing all of the bodywork, and then they're driving in the rain because they can. And other than the driver getting very wet, they keep running. You know, these engine bays are more waterproof than you think, is what it comes down to. You can also mix and match. Of course, you can. These are hood vents designed for an ND. I know an NV owner who wants to put them on his car because these are a nice slick design. We have people who have put like the style of the NV version better than the NA version, so they put them on an NA. You can mix and match. You can put vents designed for one car on another car. You can put universal vents on. There's a company that makes enormous ones for Jeeps. They're all very square looking. They're not as organic looking as the ones that we carry. But if you want almost all your hood to be bent, I think it's hoodweavers.com sells one for monsters. The important thing is you put them in the right place and that you don't affect the structure under the hood too much. The Verus ones are designed to work around the hood structure, to work with it, so you keep as much rigidity as possible. Sorry, the singular ones are. The Verus ones, the structure is different on an ND hood, so you don't see it as much. But I would recommend that if you are looking at interbreeding your hood vents, that you pay attention to the structure underneath, so you don't end up with something too much like a taco and you have to run 4 different hood pins like I might have to on my race car.
2 more quick questions?
2 more quick questions, let's do it.
So I'm going to paraphrase these and kind of put them together because I think they're kind of related. First part asked by Zach is, what would be the ultimate combined cooling solution, including vents for an NA or NB? And then Isaac wants to know, would the increased cooling help see lower knock?
Okay, those are 2 slightly different questions and they're interesting. I'm going to go with the knock question first. If you are starting to run into knock because your engine is getting near the upper end of its operating range, then yes, improving your cooling will help with knock. If your engine is running at a happy 180 degrees Fahrenheit, that's not going to solve your knock problem. So yeah, if everything is getting super hot and you're having trouble with pre-detonation because of that, then certainly improving your cooling will help there, but unfortunately it will not inherently help. This will help pull air through an intercooler, of course, which will drop down your intake air temperatures, which is directly related to your knock resistance. So yeah, they will help drive your intercooler. Naturally aspirated car, less of an issue. So yes and no. Ultimate solution for an NA, go back to those 3 stages of cooling that I talked about earlier, and you have to address the weakest one. There's no point in driving a whole bunch of air through your radiator if your water pump is cavitated, or if you're only pulling coolant from the front half of the engine. We have another video on our channel that talks about the coolant reroute and the science behind that. If you're not running a coolant reroute, you're not really pulling the heat out of the engine, so no matter how good your radiator cooling is, that's not going to help you with the heat transfer function inside the engine. So you need to look at what the weakest point is. Assuming that you've optimized your heat transfer function, that you're not overspinning your water pump, then at this point what you should be concentrating on is ducting into the radiator so the air can't go around it, and getting low pressure on the backside, which is this. This of course only works at speed, so if you are running around town, if you're having trouble, a set of fans can actually help a lot. Even at speed, fans do help. That's a common misperception. But the airflow through the radiator is actually quite slow, so fans will help even at high speed, but these will really pump the air through. So, one of everything. That's the ultimate cooling solution. There are a lot of very good options out there. They all address slightly different parts. I think these are a critical part that's often overlooked because of people just don't think about getting the air past the radiator, they're simply getting it to the radiator.
Here's an interesting one. How would the vents affect a hood scoop designed to bring air in?
Hood scoop. Now you see, the only reason you want a scoop is if you wanted high pressure under your hood.
Something
we'll walk over this. The purpose of a hood scoop is to bring in high pressure air. So the only time you want a hood scoop is for an intake. And when this car was built previously, at one point in its stage, it had the intake right here. And so this hood, and you'll find, most of the FM turbos, for example, have an intake right here in a box. And so this is acting as a hood scoop at that point, or an inlet anyhow. This is a submerged duct inlet, often called an aqueduct. That's designed to drive air in. It's blocked off right now. The only reason this one's still here is because this car, when it was at its most famous, was running this, so I left it there just for looks. But let's me talk about it. So yeah, hood vents like this and hood scoops work exactly opposite each other. The hood scoop is trying to raise the air pressure somewhere. You're designed to lower air pressure. If you're running a hood scoop, the air better be directed somewhere. It better be directed at the intake. You usually see them on old muscle cars where you've got the big pancake air filter right here, and you drive the hood scoop to dump lots of cold air right onto that pancake. But on a Miata, most hood scoops don't make a lot of sense unless you have a baffled air intake. And I have mentioned that in the past. Between TSIs and this, I was able to get intake air temps that were 14 degrees lower at cruise by using a blocked in intake. But you've got to have that. You've got to have it blocked off. You can't just dump random air in the engine bay and hope that gets you the pressure you're looking for. Any more questions?
Joe was asking about the spacers on the back of the hood, which I think you already covered.
Yeah, spacers in the back of the hood. Short version, bad idea. That's high pressure. You're going to dump air into your engine bay. You're going to restrict, or you're going to adversely affect the airflow through your heat exchangers. It's a style thing, and it's 100% a style thing. You know, it's cool to lay frame. It's not very functional to lay frame. It's cool to lift the back of your hood. It's not very functional to lift the back of your hood. If you want to do it, go for it. Just be aware of what you're doing. I think we should give people another close-up on our very high-tech magnetilic pressure sensor, because I'm very proud of the fact that we made this replica in no time. I even put the duct tape on specifically because people love duct tape. So this was made out of plumbing parts. It was sitting around my shop in the 15 minutes before our video went to shoot, and this is exactly, maybe not exactly, but this is basically what Brandon and I have used to map pressures across the hood by driving a car down the road, leaning over the windshield, and putting this on marked spots on the hood and then reading the pressures. Magnetilic gauges, you can do all sorts of really interesting things with them, because if you're trying to move airflow through a car, you need to know relative pressures, and that's exactly what a magnetilic gauge will tell you. Pressure A versus pressure B, and in this case we had a reference, a standard reference, and so we were able to map it out. That was a really fun data science experiment. I gotta tell you though, you want to do it on a windy day, because that'll mess everything up. I'm proud of this. I'm going to keep this together. I need to come up with a reason to use it. You can see it's me blowing at the hose. You can use this to test all sorts of physics that people have done. So, there we go. Hood vents, the how they work, the why they work, the benefits, some of the downsides. Rain is not your enemy. And we have one more question.
What about removing the hood entirely?
Removing the hood entirely. Aerodynamically, quite ugly. This is a nice, all the talk about a flat underfloor, well, taking the hood off is the same sort of thing. You do want the car to slip through the air fairly easily, and taking the hood off is not going to help with that. It's aerodynamically terrible. It's ugly. There's also junk underneath there. No. Yes, it will potentially help with your cooling flow. We found that exosets cool extremely well because they have no sides to their engine bay, so there's all sorts of flow through the radiators. I don't know if I'll go quite that far as to try to. You're going to add a lot of drag, very high amount of drag. I think a set of intelligently located vents would be much more effective than simply taking the hood off completely, because then you've just got air going everywhere it wants to, and you're not directing any of it. You want to be the boss of the air. You don't want to just give up to it. So, if you have any more questions, put them in the comments. We will answer them both on Facebook and on YouTube. We will come in and answer the questions, even if it's 6 years from now. Flyin Miata does sell all sorts of various hood vents, of course. We have both the singular ones like this one. We have the Verus for the ND. Verus has done some CFD based on these. I like the magnetilic gauge stuff myself, but there's all sorts of pretty colored pictures, I believe, for those on our website. So again, my name is Keith Tanner. Thank you for tuning in today, and we'll see you next week.